This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Millwall Academy coach Ricky Simons. He discusses his journey into coaching and the benefits of being exposed to high quality coaching at a young age, how a team's identity can be linked to the coaching behaviours, and the way he challenges his players to become better leaders. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So, Ricky, really appreciate you jumping on. Is everything all good your end?
Yeah, really good. I mean, coming into a new season, obviously going in with the 15s and 16s this year has been a really good step for myself and thoroughly enjoying it at the moment.
Good. So, for people that might not have come across your work or you as an individual, do you just want to, I guess, give a brief summary of what you do now or where you do it, and then maybe some key stepping stones to get to that point over your coaching career, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously got into coaching quite early at sort of 17, 18 off the back of my college program. And it was there sort of where it sort of gave me an idea that this is what I want to do and this is what I want to sort of pursue in my career, and sort of quickly done my level 1 and level 2 before I was sort of 19, and sort of met some really good coaches at a young age that I still sort of know now and have good contact with. And they've probably put me in a very good position to sort of, I would say very early on, I had very good ideas around how academy football looked, and sort of learned probably quite high level sessions at quite a young age. And I think that's what sort of kept me involved in working with older age groups and not necessarily working with foundation phases. So yeah, I sort of pretty much went into my level 2 at sort of 19, and then quite quickly wanted to progress into that sort of UEFA B sort of setup. So yeah, sort of from there at 21, sort of applied for my UEFA B, got onto that, and was working with Dagenham Redbridge in their academy to start with when they had an academy. So I went in there sort of assisting and working with the 10s and 11s to start with at 21, 22. And it just progressed pretty quickly from there. Again, working with some good people at Dagenham before obviously that academy closed. Obviously, Kenny Brown, who's now the head of coaching at Millwall, was working at Dagenham Redbridge at the time. And I think once that sort of finished there, we sort of had the discussion that I would potentially move across to Millwall at some point. So yeah, I think obviously going through and how it worked was once Dagenham Redbridge closed down, and sort of Millwall approached me and sort of said, "Do you want to come in and just help with the 14s and assist with them?" It was a bit of a no-brainer to sort of make that step. And that's where it really sort of ignited my sort of passion for coaching even further, stepping up and working with better players and better coaches. And then just straight from there, just looking to apply for my UEFA A license and getting onto that, and really sort of thoroughly enjoying that sort of setup. And it just sort of gives you that little bit of extra sort of buzz, and I thoroughly sort of enjoyed the detail and the content that was involved with it and the people that you meet when you're on these courses. And yeah, and obviously that's took me into sort of leading with the 14s and working at Millwall for 6 seasons now. And then this season working with the 15s and 16s has been a really good step for myself, and something I really look and enjoy. Looking forward to sort of taking that forwards and seeing where that can take me now. And that's where it's up to at the current point.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Quite a, I guess, unique journey in the context of what age groups and stuff you work with. So we'll definitely dig into that. I guess the first question for me is, you mentioned right at the start around realizing coaching was something that you wanted to pursue. Why was that? What drew you to it? Why did you realize that actually maybe the playing side doesn't interest me as much, and the coaching side is something that I want to go down?
I mean, I always played as a kid and sort of a teenager, and always played at a decent level and stuff. And I think I wasn't naive to sort of think at 17, 18 that yes, I could go and play a non-league level of football, and that wasn't a problem. But I think trying to pursue a career in football was ultimately the biggest goal for me. And football is obviously my passion. It's what live and breathe. So it's to be working at academy level in a professional setup, and then working, fingers crossed, through the system and to the top. I knew if I was going to get to that point, it'd have to be through coaching and not through playing itself. So I think that's what sort of drove me straight away to sort of get involved. And like I said, again, at 17, 18, working with some very good coaches. For instance, Mark Phillips, who's now the under-18s coach at West Ham, was sort of a big influence at that point, who coached. He coached me for a year, and then obviously got me sort of working within the sort of the coaching game quite early. So he had a big influence in that setup, and sort of, I've always felt I've been someone that's been quite organised, and obviously having that passion for football, it was just sort of a bit of a no-brainer to sort of dip my sort of toe in the water a little bit and say, okay, well, I'm enjoying this. It's something I like at this young age. And I was working with, at 18, 19, I was working with college program students at 16, 17. So straight away, I think I didn't have to work with the younger ages, where it can be really tough working with sort of grassroots teams and just sort of kids clubs and stuff. I sort of went straight in and worked with a good level footballer. So I think that's what pushed it quite early, that this is what I want to pursue and drive with.
And in terms of obviously delivery for you at that age, I guess you're a bit of a sponge because it would have been new to you, but you mentioned organisation there being one of your strengths. Was there anything else that you had like naturally that you found that actually I'm really good at communicating, or I'm really good at demonstrating, or whatever? What was kind of your strength at that time as an 18-year-old that allowed you to hit the ground running?
Yeah, I think communication was probably one of the biggest things. I always felt I had a good rapport with all the players that I worked with, and sort of had a good understanding of how they wanted to work. And I think that was probably the biggest part of what sort of helped me in them early years. But I think alongside that, you've got to have that passion and drive, and you've got to be able to sort of commit yourself. And you're doing things on a voluntarily basis and stuff like that. So sometimes it is really tough, but ultimately you've got to look at sort of see the long term sort of goal on that. But yeah, I think communication probably being one of the biggest ones that I sort of felt, okay, well, I've got communication. I'm really good at sort of talking within a group or talking to individuals and sort of making them understand certain things and how we want to play and the sort of values that we have. And obviously alongside that with the organisation, I sort of felt, again, they're two things that you massively need for me as a coach. So for me to have them two things at quite a young age, or what I felt I had, again, it was a good sort of inroad to sort of work in at a higher level. So
how's that developed? How's that developed over time? Because I imagine, as an 18-year-old, it'd be very different to as you are like late 20s now. So how's that changed over this period of time?
There's a massive difference. If I could go back and watch myself as an 18-year-old delivering sessions, it would be crazy. But I think at the time when you're 18, 19, delivering sessions to, again, sort of 15, 16-year-old, I think at the time you're just praying that that one 20-minute session or that one 30-minute session is going really well, and you're just trying to sort of nick ideas and steal stuff at that age, I think, and you're just trying to replicate it. And I think now it's really sort of trying to put your own spin on things and actually trying to develop your own values within them sessions and working along a club's syllabus or principles of play and the style that we want to achieve. So I think at the time, as much as I still feel I'm very organised, the type of organisation and the type of communication is massively different. Because I think where we have the sort of youth award strands and stuff now, you sort of learn a lot about how you might communicate with players and your interventions. I think at the time, the way I was coached very early and the people that I worked with, it was very command style. It was very much, this is how we want it done, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think now there's so much that I've learned in terms of the way that every kid needs something different in terms of how you need to approach an intervention, or there's loads of different aspects when it comes to that. So, there's obviously been a massive development in that point. But like I said, communication, organisation, and things like that, the passion that drives me every day is still the same.
So you mentioned there around the, I guess, individualization that's come up more recently within I guess coaching practice, etc. Do you just want to dig a little deeper into that and maybe give some examples of how you've adapted your communication style or your approach with two individuals, and maybe why you've had successes or why you've had some notable failures and what that's looked like?
Yeah, again, I'll use the academy as an example. For instance, I think every academy is the same. That you'll have two players that, one very outgoing, very sort of lad, or very happy to sort of take the floor and sort of answer questions and be the first to talk. And then you'll have others that realistically could go to a session and probably not say anything. So you've really got the two contrasts. And I think in terms of the way I've sort of communicated with them and sort of spoke to them on an individual basis is that it's okay not to be the loudest in the group. Okay. But at some point, whether it's a one-to-one chat or whether it's in a small group, there needs to be some sort of communication on whether that's him showing me something on a tactics board or whether that's him maybe in a one-to-one sort of analysis meeting, or whether that's just communicating via PMA and him putting stuff on there. So that's sometimes how we've had to adapt or work within a team that, okay, how are we going to get a little bit more out of this player via our communication? And I think also with the more outgoing player, the louder player, it's trying to sort of, that's his character. So let's see where that takes us, and try and get that information out of him, and not just let it be noise all the time. Can there be real good content and detail in what he's trying to sort of say? And can he maybe become a bit more of a leader within that role? So I think that's something within the club that we've tried to drive sort of massively, that can we have more leaders within our team, and how is that going to look? And I think there's definitely always going to be 3 or 4 players in your team that you can see that they're going to be leaders and potentially future captains, etc. But we need to make sure even the ones in the group that maybe aren't the loudest, are we still communicating and getting the same, are we still getting that same sort of communication from them where we sort of understand that they know the detail of what we want, etc.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and it's something I've mulled over for a while. As time, like if you imagine that added like a chart of all the different avenues you can explore of huddle, PMA, face-to-face contact, in-session question, whatever you want to call it, and then actually plotting where your lads engaged low or high on that spectrum. Because I imagine you might have someone who's really good on PMA but doesn't like speaking, the example you've given there. And it's actually, how do you cater your feedback to them? And then at times, do we over prescribe what we're doing for the players by making them go down avenues that they don't enjoy? So huddle is a good example for me. I think sometimes we force players to make clips when maybe they don't like making clips, maybe watching themselves back, although we want them to do it, that isn't what they enjoy doing. They prefer being actually on the grass. So I wonder sometimes whether that over prescription actually is removing the individualized approach like you're talking about it. Obviously in communication styles, I think the coaching fraternity now is really aware of how we engage with the players and individualizing and stuff. But do we do that with the actual platforms we're using to then make it individualized to the individual? I don't know if you've had any experiences around that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the tools that these kids have got now is unbelievable in terms of the things that they can do each week to review what they're doing, and obviously then look back over clips and gain feedback from coaches, etc. I think it's good to have all these tools in place. Now, whether these kids want to use them, that's totally their choice. I think at times I have a certain individual who wants to do everything, and he does everything to the best of his ability, and he is spot on with everything. So I would see that as he's obviously buying into that, and that's what he wants to do, and he loves to sort of show that he's the first to watch his games. He clips everything he does. His PMA is always up to date, etc. And there's others that aren't, but that maybe just shows us a little bit about their character. But that's not a negative way to look at it. That's just maybe the way they work. And is that having a negative effect on their performance? No, it's not. So it doesn't really, it's not a massive issue. Obviously, I know it's something that we always want the boys to do, because we see analysis and huddle as something that it's definitely going to be an improvement tool for them. So yeah, we've certainly got boys within our academy that want to touch on all these things and want to sort of help as much as possible by doing their PMA, really reflecting with good detail, clipping everything they do. And there's other boys that don't, and it's really not a problem. But I think as long as they've got everything there and all the tools that can potentially develop and help them in the future, because I think the further they go down the line into 18s, 23s, first team, they're going to have to get used to sitting in rooms for meetings and looking at their own clips. And I think that's the way the game's going. I'm sure it's maybe a bit different at Cat 1 academies and stuff, and in terms of what boys have got. But we went on a sort of a study trip to the tests in Holland, and the amount of sort of stuff they've got there in terms of the players can clip their own stuff, and the sort of access time they have to computers, etc. It was really eye-opening and brilliant. And I think that's a massive way the game's going to go. And these boys have to buy into it, as much as it might not be what they want to do. I think further down the line, they're going to have that tool in their locker.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just wonder, someone like Wayne Rooney, if you had him as an 11-year-old, I can't see him sitting behind a computer screen doing PMA.
No.
I think he'd be out with his mates on the streets playing football. And it's, I guess, given the opportunity and challenging them on those practices at points to say, listen, you might need this further down the road, so we're almost going to enforce you to do it. But we appreciate that you might not do it for however many weeks out of the season, but for this 4-week block, we're telling you got to do it. And going down that route. But what you said there about Vitesse Arnhem, really interesting in terms of study visit. Can you just talk through that with us and maybe some of the learnings and findings you had when you were out there?
Yeah, so we went it was pre-COVID, so most of the coaches went out there, and it was a really good sort of study visit, and one of the sort of first ones that I've done. And what was quite eye-opening, that what they did was not too dissimilar to what we'll probably do in England, and the types of practices definitely weren't anything extraordinary. But obviously, not speaking the language, we're not too sure on what the detailed input was. But it was really sort of eye-opening in terms of facilities that they had, and sort of starter activities that they might start with, and they're very fun-based, and they just let the kids come in straight away. They're in, they're playing, everything's sort of go straight away. There's quite a relaxed atmosphere. And that was quite eye-opening. But in terms of the session content, it was nothing too dissimilar to what I've seen over here and stuff. And I think that was a big thing that we sort of took away, that, okay, well, this is how they do it. This is how we do it. It doesn't really have much of an effect in terms of, there's nothing weird and wonderful. But I just liked the way it was quite a relaxed atmosphere. That there didn't seem to be much real pressure at the younger age groups, at the 12s, 13s and 14s at the test. Now, when you got to sort of watch the 18s back, there definitely was a lot sort of more of a intent on the pressing and the sort of high intensity sort of session that they wanted. And there was a lot of energy from the coaches when they got to them older age groups.
And in terms of coach interactions, did you see the differences across the pathway? So with those younger age groups, when you mentioned 12s, 13s, did you see them being maybe more relaxed in their interventions, particularly the arrival activities, to then maybe go in more stern or strict, if you like, at those 18s age groups when they're obviously having to do a lot of tell regarding the pressing and stuff?
There was a definite sort of, there was definite progression with that. And again, it's very similar to what we see here, that at your younger age groups in the foundation phase, there's definitely sort of that more fun, sort of relaxing energy and sort of few more interventions. And it certainly is sort of a little bit more chilled and relaxed when they're doing them sort of things. And as you could see, the sort of age groups get older and older and older, that there was that more sort of sterner sort of approach to it. And I suppose that's because at some point, like they say, there has to be progression, and they have to sort of make sure the players are really sort of putting it in and taking on what they want. And progressing into their games on Sundays, etc., and obviously 18s, 23s, that there needs to be some sort of command style within that. So yeah, but again, I didn't see it as them being much difference to what I've seen here from 9s through to 18s, from in terms of that fun aspect of being more command style with the top.
And in terms of challenges for them as an academy, is there any particular challenges that they face that is unusual to what we'd face over here? Or are they, if I look at someone like Athletic Bilbao, for example, that can only have players within their specific region, that's a very specific challenge that they face, which probably no one else in the world faces, because they only pick players from this region all the way through to the first team as well. Was there anything particularly at Vitesse from what you saw that was unique as the challenges that they faced?
I think the biggest one, again, obviously they can only really recruit within a certain distance, the same as us in England, and up to a certain age group. The big challenge for them was competing against the Ajaxes, the PSVs, the Feyenoords. That was the big challenges for them, and it's probably no dissimilar to what we have to work with in London in terms of competing with Chelsea, Arsenal, Tottenham's, Palace, etc. So no, there wasn't any sort of different challenges that I see that we had over here. Again, if you're from that region, that's the club that you want to play for. Where if you're from London, the opportunities are endless. So that's probably the only real difference that I would see, that if boys are growing up, living in and around Vitesse, then that's the club that they want to grow up and play for and support. Very different to being in England and being around London. So that's probably the biggest challenge. And then I think the challenge for them that they said was when they obviously get to 16s and 18s and stuff, is them being picked apart from sort of Ajax and Feyenoords and PSVs, etc., and their best kids moving on. And then they can't really do much about that. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities into what we both do. Again, I think it's just a bit different in terms of Premier League, Championship just being so competitive.
And in terms of, I guess, big takeaways for you, or anything that maybe challenged your working, or the way you organise, or the way you communicate, or any detail you added in, was there one big takeaway that you had where you said, oh yeah, I'm going to steal that and put that in my sessions, or I'm going to steal that way of demoing to put in my session?
I don't think there was anything in particular like that. I mean, there was a few sessions that we sort of spoke as coaches and sort of adapted and sort of thought that was a good idea, because we did have an understanding of what they were trying to get out of that session. So there was certainly a few different session ideas that we sort of took and adapted and thought, okay, that we could work something like that. But there wasn't nothing massively that, again, I haven't seen in England to seeing over there. So in terms of the way they delivered, maybe it was a little bit more relaxed at the start of their sessions, and it weren't so strict and firm to be in on time. And it was more just, okay, just, come in, get yourself started, do your little bits to start with. And then they just got started at some point. It didn't really feel as strict as maybe what we would work over here, that we're looking at a start point and that's it. You've got to be in for that time. But no, I wouldn't say there was any massive takeaways in that aspect. Like I said, it's probably just a few sort of sessions that we sort of nicked and adapted and sort of went from there.
Cool. So one of the things you mentioned, obviously, quite early on, is that you were able to get through a lot of the qualifications quite quickly. And, obviously picked up a lot of learning from then. In terms of going from qualification to qualification, did you see any massive jumps in that pathway? And then obviously looking maybe in particular at your A license, I guess, how long ago did you do your A license? And then what key messages, what key challenges did you have whilst on that course?
So my A license I started 3 years ago, and passed a year within that. So yeah, 2 to 2.5 years ago, I passed that. So, and at the time there was obviously the A license then adapted and obviously went into blocks and stuff, and you stayed away for 3 days. And so obviously there was a little bit of a progression there. I think obviously going back to the old type of UEFA B, where you done a week's block or 2 weeks block, and then you went back for weekends. and that was held back at the David Beckham Academy at the O2. So that was like some time ago now. So yeah, I've had obviously the progression was quite quick, and I always sort of set my sights at when I get to the age of 30, I wanted to be A license qualified, and I've achieved that. So I think obviously looking at the sort of 4 qualifications that I've done throughout the pathway is that I really sort of enjoyed the UEFA B and sort of touching on the detail there. Like I said, because of the people that I've worked with and the age groups I've worked with at quite a young age, I was sort of probably looking at and sort of nicking and adapting UEFA B sessions quite early. And I think that was a massive help to sort of get me started when I started at Millwall, working with the 14s, working 11v11. I sort of felt comfortable in that role straight away because I had the opportunity to sort of work them UEFA B type sessions quite early. But obviously, I really enjoyed the A license in terms of the session content that was going on, the interventions from the coaches, and I think just the level of coaches that you're working with and being taught by. That's something that I really, really enjoyed. And obviously, I know everyone has different experiences when they go on the A license, and certain people like classroom work a bit more. Some people like group work. Some people want to be coached and want to be assessed. Now, I always sort of wanted a mixture of everything. But I think the biggest thing for me and the thing that I enjoyed most when being on them courses was watching good coaches coach and seeing how they sort of adapt certain topics and certain sessions to fit the players' needs. And I sort of enjoyed sort of looking at that and sort of seeing how can I adapt that to my under 14s or under 15s. And that they were the key things that I took away, and sort of the detail of them working on the 3 sort of blocks of playing out from the back and building through midfield, finishing the attack, and vice versa on the defensive side. So they were key things that I took away. Sometimes, you might spend a bit too much time in the classroom where I want to be on the grass a bit more, but I think them sort of interactions you have with the tutors and also with the people around you and sort of share experiences and stuff, I think they're so valuable to how you sort of progress on your A license. And you have to sort of, like you said earlier, you have to be a sponge in terms of taking that information on, and you have to sort of be ready to sort of really take on as much as possible, whether that's from someone you're working with or whether that's a tutor or piece of information or a PowerPoint that you've sort of been presented. You need to try and take on as much as possible. And I think that's what I've enjoyed, because I've always sort of been good in the classroom. I've always sort of been good in sort of coming through school and into college. I've always enjoyed that academic side. So for me, it was a massive positive. Would I have maybe liked to sort of delivered a little bit more myself and been critiqued a little bit? I think so, because I think that's one way for myself is to learn that even when you have FAYCDs coming now, I want to be critiqued. I want to be filmed. I want people to tell me where I'm going wrong and what I need to do better, because ultimately I'm still on a massive sort of learning curve. And I know where I want to get to, and I know I need to do more, and I need to be better, and I need to develop. And I feel the best way for me to do that sometimes is being told the harsh truths. So, yeah, I think they were the things that I took away from the sort of B license to A license, that I enjoyed being assessed on the B license. I enjoyed sort of being told, you know what, you've done really well here, you passed, you need to do this, you need to do that. And then going on to the A license, it being very open and very much just loads of delivery, loads of content, you taking as much as you want, and then you're assessed in your own environment. So yeah, there was loads of positives, and I've thoroughly enjoyed all the courses that I've been on. But I think with the A license, I maybe would have liked to deliver myself a bit more. But I think that's more so just because I wanted people to tell me that, this could have been done better, that could have been done better, or that was really good. So
it's interesting because I'm completely opposite. I hated delivering on the course, but only because I don't know how you have with this, but when you've got like a random group of under 18s that you're coaching with, I was like trying to have those individualized interactions and stuff is way harder. You're almost trying to pull blood out of a stone a little bit when trying to get them to an overlapping run. They're like, mate, I've done 2 hours of overlapping runs and happening. So for me, I really enjoyed the in situ stuff just because they get to see your real world problems, if you like. But I do see the value of obviously having a crack at it, so you can see. Obviously, when I went on mine, there was probably 2 or 3 sessions or 2 or 3 moments where I was like, I really like that. I'm going to steal that. I think one for me was around the higher end, giving centre halves an out ball. We're talking about playing out with overloads, so 2 versus the 1, or 4 versus the 3, or 4 versus the 2, etc. And then he mentioned, if you're getting your centre half to drive, having that ability to almost go over the opposite fullback and your opposite wide player knowing that's coming. So if you've got a left-sided centre half, him going out, if he gets into trouble, he knows he can hit that space in behind, and the right winger is going to join in to try and get the ball. And I thought, older age groups, if you go into the performance game, that's a really nice way of actually, identifying it. There's a few others that I really liked as well. For you, was there anything in particular where you went, yeah, I'm stealing that, like that little bit of detail or that session? I love that. I'm definitely taking that with me.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we had a visit from Aaron Danks at the time, who's now, I believe, at Villa, working in the first team there. And I think at the time he was working with the under-20s at England, and he was just superb. Like, I think just the way he sort of interacted with this group of sort of 17, 18-year-olds who were just from a local program, that, okay, they're decent players, but the way he just interacted with them straight away and really got everything he said he wanted out of the session, he got. He literally nailed the top end. I'm not saying he's obviously delivered that in the past and stuff like that, but I mean, that was certainly a session I nicked, and it was just working in that final third, just around sort of finishing the attack. And it was just sort of like a little overload to play into midfield. And could you incorporate your wide player to sort of get sort of different types of crosses? Okay, whether that was get to the byline, can you hang it up, or can you sort of deliver early, or can you sort of drive in and sort of get little cutbacks in? And I just really sort of thought I was like, wow, this is what the level is. This is what I need to maybe try and get myself closer to in terms of how that delivery sort of happens. And it's not so much replicating and trying to copy. It's never that. You need to always put your own spin on it and be your own person in them aspects. But I think I sort of stepped back and went, okay, this is the level that England are obviously looking at and stuff. So that was certainly a session that I stole and sort of worked along. I worked it with my 14s, and again, it worked superbly well, and loads of opportunities for the players to sort of have opportunities to finish the attack, and obviously then work the transition going that way. What if we lose it in that final third? And yeah, just how he related it to the game and sort of new trends in the game, where I think one of the things he sort of spoke about was, okay, well, if you're working with wide players who are playing on the opposite sides, and I think he used Christian Eriksen as a sort of example, that if he was playing out on the left, how might his cross look? Okay, well, if he's cutting back in on the edge of the box, where might that cross be delivered and stuff like that? So I really sort of thought there was some interesting sort of takes from that. But yeah, that would probably be the big one. We had Nottingham Forest under 23s come in at the time and deliver a session, how they would set up. I think it was like match day -2. So how would they look 2 days before a match? And how the two coaches work, the lead coach and the assistant coach, how did they work? And again, that was brilliant, because at all clubs now, you generally work with two lead coaches. And that was just good to see how they sort of had that sort of rapport between them, that one coach took half, one coach took the other. They had sort of unit work, and they sort of brought it all back together, and it nicely linked, and you could sort of see that again, that's the elite level under 23s and working with good players. And again, it definitely looked like a perfect session. They had all the area they wanted, they all had all the players they wanted, they obviously knew what they were dealing with. So yes, you sort of feel it has to look good. Okay. But they're the sort of key takeaways in terms of what I really sort of enjoyed and went, wow, that's high level stuff. And certainly sessions that I've nicked and used and adapted to myself, which I'm sure all coaches have done that. If they haven't, then I think they might be lying.
Yeah, my quote's the best coaches are the best thieves. Something I got taught when I was 18 or 19, something like that. And they're like, the best coaches are the best thieves. They just steal ideas or quotes or sessions from everyone else. So it's really, we had the 23s come in as well, and obviously it's a very similar experience than that, which is really interesting. I guess linking this back to what the A license entails quite a lot now is around your philosophy and what your philosophy is as a coach and what that means for you. So if I was to try and put you on the spot a little bit and say, as your philosophy, what do you want to see from your teams? What would that be?
I definitely sort of feel that in the way I've always wanted to work, and I've certainly had that's certainly been adapted through the years that working obviously previously with Dagenham Redbridge and now with Millwall. I certainly have seen a massive sort of, with myself, I want to see an aggressive type of football. I want to see a very physical and dynamic game. I want to see if it was my team, I want to see them sort of high pressing. But I also want them to be able to adapt. You say, you know what, you can't do that all the time, and it maybe looks like a mid block. But I think my philosophy is that you have to have many different ways of playing out, and that isn't just playing at centre half every time. That I want my team to be able to deal with playing through the thirds, playing from the back, playing into your forward line. I want them to be able to go on the high press and do it all together and do them things as a team. So I think my philosophy would be that I want my team to be very dynamic, but also be very good decision makers within that. Because the game's it's so different, and depending on what side you're coming up against and stuff, I just want my team would have to be able to be a team that adapts. They would have to be someone that, yes, we can play it from the back, but yes, we can also clip into a channel. Okay, well, maybe it's working in a 4-4-2, or maybe it's being able to adapt that into a 4-3-3 where someone drops into about three midfield. That I don't want to put that much emphasis on a formation, but it's just more about the way we play in possession, that people can handle the ball. And then out of possession, it's being that really aggressive, high pressing team that we're going to go and set about you. And when we do nick it, we're going to try and go for goals as quick as we can. I think they would be the big things that I look at.
And does that mirror up with obviously working for Millwall? Does that mirror up with what their academy philosophy or academy plan is?
It definitely, there's obviously a big part of that has obviously come from working at Millwall and stuff, and probably seeing the values of working hard and stuff like that. Because maybe when I walked in the door at Millwall, it was very much, no, we want to play out from the back, and we want to be sort of expansive, and we just want to be really open and just play pass for no point. But I think the more you work with them environments, you do understand that the game and the way it's moving on is that players have to go and press the ball. They have to go and work hard. They have to do things with intensity. So yeah, I would definitely say that my philosophy's been adapted since working for Millwall, and the values of the club of being sort of showing a good attitude, being positive both in possession and out of possession. I would say that's definitely had an influence on myself. And I think it's just having that hard working nature throughout, whether that's in possession or out of possession, that everyone's got that nature of, yeah, we're going to go today. They ain't going to outrun us. They're not going to outwork us. And that was one of the big things that I sort of felt, okay, well, if I was to step away and go into first team football, wherever it was, that I would want my team to be the most hard working team. But there has to be some sort of quality coming back the other way, in terms of we're going to be quite open and free playing, and we're going to try and play as much as we possibly can. But it's having that decision making aspect, that there's a time and a place for everything. And I've always liked playing in more of a 4-3-3 situation, where you can overload that midfield and sort of try and get your wide players nice and high and sort of pin them back a little bit and try and sort of play a bit more of an open style football. But I think ultimately, out of possession, I want the team to be aggressive, and if we can nick it in their half, we're always going to have more opportunities of scoring.
Yes, it's a really interesting one around that. I guess next question for me is, how do you exhibit that philosophy or that want from your team in a day-to-day, week-to-week basis in your interactions with the players? So is there any particular non-negotiables you have, or any particular strategies you use to ensure that they are exhibiting those behaviours that you want?
Like I said, I think within the club and within my philosophy that, you know, hard work and attitude has to come sort of first in these things. I think that's what's going to take you the furthest. And I think how we would get that out of the players is you have to make sure that the players are very understanding of what you want and how you want it done. And there has to be sort of that open forum that you understand in your players, and you know, there's going to be times where players come in and they're not going to be 100%, or they're going to dealing with different emotional things outside, and you have to have that sort of man management skills that you understand that. But I think some point when we sort of talk about hard work and sort of intensity to your run, do players perceive that as a negative? Oh, I've got to run again. Oh, it's going to be a really hard session. Do they see that as a negative, or can we spin that and make that as positive as possible? That we tried to put the spin on it, myself and Dean, who I work with at 15s, we're trying to put the spin on it that if we lose possession, that's not a negative. That's just a really good opportunity for us to go and show how good we are on the press. So I think we're just trying to put a bit more of a positive spin that if we lose possession, then it gives us a great opportunity to go and work on these other aspects of working hard and showing a positive attitude, whether that's in your press. So I think there's obviously a few ways that we've sort of tried to bring this out, and whether that was in group discussions or whether that's just really us being command style for big parts of it. And there's been some times and some games and weeks that before we've had like sort of silent matches where we've really allowed the players to try and drive it. And let's see how they adapt to taking control. Because I think sometimes as coaches, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people in a similar sort of situation, that you find yourself getting so sort of emotionally attached to the game that you end up trying to make the decisions for these players, which is obviously something that we have to try and work on as coaches. That say, you know what, youth development, these players still have to make decisions. These players still have to foul at times for them to be able to step forwards. So yeah, I think in terms of the values and the philosophy of myself and the club is that every session we try and add that intensity to what we do. And I think that's a core value throughout.
And so if you've got someone who challenges that, let's look at the hard-working one because it's a really easy example.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a professional player that I can use. Like, let's look at Dele Alli, for example. I know that at the moment he's getting a bit of stick, and at times his body language isn't the best. Being a Spurs fan, it isn't the best. He does cover a lot of distance from some of the things I've seen, but that's by the by. If you've got an individual like him that maybe at times isn't as intense on the press as you would like, or is challenging that group dynamic of hard work, how would you go around addressing that, and how would you support them to try and get those behaviours where you'd want them to be?
It's a really it's a really difficult one. I mean, if you look at someone like Dele Alli now, he's sort of like 24, 25. So has he sort of, is that just how he's going to be now? Or is there any way that we can adapt that? And I think obviously the man management skills would have to be a very good level to deal with someone like that who's on a lot of money, and dealing with that ego of someone who's been a really good star at some point at 19, 20, being one of the most spoken about players in Europe to what he is now. You'd like to think that if you maybe have sort of revolved the game around him a little bit and made him the star man, or made him sort of, it's going to go through you and we're really going to use you as our key player. Does that maybe give him something to say, you know what, he believes in me, he wants me to be a big part of this? Because some players just don't react if you go the other way. Well, no, you're going to be left. You're going to be on the side. Okay, you're going to be sub for 2 or 3 weeks. You're going to go. Some players you won't get that reaction from. And I think if it was a similar sort of situation at Millwall, is that we like to think from under nines, whether they come in on trial later on, is that these core values are sort of ingrained in our players, that this is just what we want and this is how you have to be. Now, we obviously understand that every player has their own character and we want that to sort of flourish. But if our values of a club are hard work, then unfortunately these players have to buy into that. And it's really hard to look through the academy and say, okay, well, is he not really hard working? I would say most of the players in our academy are hard working. And unfortunately, in my belief, is that at 16, 17, 18, if you're not hard working, yeah, you might be very talented. It's going to get you somewhere and you maybe can get a first year pro contract. But at some point, if you ain't working hard, you ain't getting that opportunity. And that's the harsh realities, I believe, anyway.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Luke Carey, who works for Southampton, who obviously played for Bristol City as well, his phrase is natural consequences. So he discusses around, lads not doing their clips or not doing their extras or not taking care of their body, not eating right. And he goes like, the natural consequences, if I don't take care of my body and I get injured, someone else takes my place. And then that other player who has done all those bits, does really well, naturally I end up on the bench. That means that my game time goes down, which means I can't improve as much as I would have done. So the natural consequence for me not doing all these extra bits might be that actually I find myself not in the squad and not getting a contract because I haven't done all those extra bits. I think what you've said there around, if they don't work hard when you start getting to that PDP stage, it almost does become a natural consequence. If you're not going to do it, then you're just not going to get selected.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think we could all pick out players that we've said, okay, well, they are talented. These are top players, 15, 16s, top players. But does he work hard enough? Okay, well, that's going to keep him in the building. That's going to keep him in the building probably till he's in the under 23s. But at some point, like that old saying, that isn't going to be enough. And there will be that one or two sort of mavericks that get through the system that haven't really shown that hard work. But you can only set these players up to sort of say, you know what, you need to be doing the extra. You need to be doing your clips. You need to be doing it, because you would never say anything but that. I think you'd always say, you need to work as hard as possible. You need to you need to do more than that next player, because if you don't do that, then someone else will be doing that. So us as coaches, you can only sort of say, you need to try and do as much as possible, and you need to do that by being hardworking. And I look at my 15s now, and I think every single one of them are very, very hardworking. Now, will they all make it to the end in Millwall's first team? Probably not. But you can only sort of set them sort of barriers, and you can set them sort of targets to reach, that knowing at the end of it, they've given everything they possibly can. But there will certainly be players through the system where you'll say, wow, very talented, but doesn't work particularly hard. We like to think at some point that's going to probably hold him back. But sometimes you can never say never, and you just don't know.
If you're an adult Taarabt, you'll make it through. I think that's someone like that.
Exactly that.
Exactly, yeah. Someone like him, he's so technically gifted. That's what got him through, despite all the other bits. Do you see from year to year, when you're working with different groups, kind of the different persona of the coach? So, like the conversation that we're having here, obviously you've elaborated on your philosophy and your beliefs, and you would have seen your 14s now going into the 15s age group, and obviously you've worked with them. But do you see when maybe you get a new group of 14s that you would have done for the previous 6 years, that one, they wouldn't do things maybe exactly the way that you naturally would do them, or two, they act in the way kind of their coach represents. So if their coach is very much, I'm going to focus all on the ball, then the group itself is all on the ball. If their coach is very aggressive in terms of being physical on the press, they're going to be really, really physical on the press. Do you see that as they come through the academy pathway?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, fortunately enough, the groups that we work with at 15, 16s were my groups previously and stuff. So I've had them sort of groups now for 3 years. So I like to feel that there's been a real good sort of, they sort of are playing, and sort of the styles that they have are very much to sort of how me and Dean would work at 15s and stuff like that. But I think you can definitely tell when they come through the age groups that they are very tactically aware, which we like. And I think sometimes it's physically always very good. but I think always technical is something that we need to improve on. And I think we can see that coming through the age groups that, again, players are very, again, hardworking. They come in, they're willing to sort of run through brick walls for the team and stuff. But I think it's having that technical aspect of the game as well needs to be a little bit better, and maybe how we work that. Do we still maybe have a bit too much emphasis on the winning side of it? When, like we said before, that it's not the win at all cost sort of situations that, I certainly feel at sort of 13s and 14s that we can maybe have a higher technical program that when we come into 15s, 16s that, they're not far off working in that sort of 18s and 23s that they've got to be technically up to scratch. It's maybe just a tactical that we can touch on and develop. Because I don't sort of feel when players get to sort of 15, 16 at academy level that the technical shouldn't be far off now. We should nearly be there. And it's maybe just obviously the physical that needs to improve on, whether they're sort of under maturated. But then it's obviously the tactical that I believe sort of a massive part of our job to sort of lead them into sort of the 18s and 23 sort of pathway now. So, I think coming through the system and sort of looking at the other coaches that we have is that I think the foundation, obviously the YDP do a brilliant sort of job in there. Can we maybe be a little bit more technical throughout our program and maybe a little bit more open on our interventions? And I think looking at the 15s I've had now, previously when they were 13s, I think they just looked at us as coaches to give them all the answers. And I think we can make them better decision makers within that and sort of the interventions and the constraints we put on our games and our practices. I think that would probably be the biggest thing that sort of throughout the age groups is that when they've come into 15s and 16s, can we make them better decision makers, and can we have that maybe higher technical sort of aspect to the younger age groups?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and this is more of a personal observation of the groups that I've worked with. So I'm a big believer in like the out of possession being aggressive stuff. And the way I say it to the lads is, particularly in the foundation phase, go as a pack. You go. I use the terminology "go as a wolf pack" because they will laugh when you say that. But go as a wolf pack.
Yeah.
Win the ball back because you all want the ball. And they buy into that normally pretty well. And then I look around maybe other coaches that maybe focus on other aspects like skills and stuff. And I always think, okay, so the coach does really put some of their identity into that group. And I guess what you're trying to get across a pathway is every interaction with a coach for a year or 6 months, whatever it is, that you've got such a vary along that pathway that it allows them to pick up all those nuggets. So if mine's being aggressive out of possession, okay, we've managed to harness that. The next one is going to be being really creative in 1v1s. We can harness that. Hopefully, like you said, by the time they get to 15, 16s, they've had loads of really cool experiences, which has allowed them to develop. One thing you mentioned there kind of around the individual decision making, and you also mentioned around kind of having silent games where you allowed them to take a bit of ownership and see if they can drive the group, and linking that all the way back to what you said about creating leaders. So have you seen an uptake in terms of when you've been able to establish and create those leaders to having more success in those type of environments?
Yeah, I think with how we've worked, obviously we haven't worked silent games for a while now, but obviously when we had them previously, that I think at the time it was very good for players that we already believed were leaders within that group. So we had a really good response in terms of the players driving it and making their own decisions and coming up with their own sort of team talks, etc., and how we wanted to play. And we obviously give them the ideas of this is what we've worked on, this is what you might want to involve. Okay, and then they could sort of reflect back on that. But like we said, I don't believe you're not going to make everyone in your group a leader. But if you can get that little bit more out of them in terms of the communication aspect, or maybe just communicating with their centre half partnership, or speaking with their forward on maybe what they wanted them to do, then that's a massive sort of development for us. Now we know there's probably going to be 2 or 3 in each group that are quite loud and quite vocal and want to sort of become that leader and that captain within the group. But yeah, I think with anything we do like that in terms of driving sort of leadership and sort of individualism, that is that the players have to sort of represent and sort of reflect our club values within that. So yeah, go on.
No, that was going to be my next question. So, if you're looking at identifiers for what are perceived as leaders, what kind of key identifiers would you have to say we think this is an individual that can, go on in a leadership capacity?
I think someone that is respected by others, and I would probably say that someone who's a massive team player, that he's willing to do that extra for someone else, that players look up to for when something's not going right. Is he going to sort of bring us through this period, but that can be in so many different ways. That can be someone being vocal. That can be someone maybe making 2 or 3 challenges to sort of get that intensity back into the group. Or is that maybe someone just making 3 or 4 passes and being a bit more brave? Okay, well, we're going to be high press, but no, I'm still going to try and get on the ball and I'm going to try and make 3 or 4 passes. Or I think that side of being a bit more brave can sometimes sort of show leadership within that. So there's so many different ways that we can sort of look at leadership. And I know, like I said, it's something that we massively have been trying to drive, that we want players to be team players. We want them to be respected within their group, but that doesn't just come through being loud and vocal and yeah, he's really loud, so he's our leader. No, we have leaders in terms of showing and giving examples within a game that, okay, I'm a leader, but I'm not gonna be loud and vocal. But it's just showing them and demonstrating them leadership skills throughout. That I think we've got a really good mixture of players that want to be vocal, but also want to maybe lead and set by example. And then players that want to be brave and get on the ball and maybe show what they can do. And I think that then sort of encourages others to do the same. So I think that's a good sign of a leader for us, is that someone has all them sort of different qualities. Brilliant. If they've got them all, brilliant. But if they've only got one of the 3 or one of the 4, that still shows signs that they've got leadership and something that we can develop throughout.
Do you think it's natural? Do you think someone's born with it, or do you think they learn it?
I would say, I think it's something they can learn, because I don't necessarily just think, like I said, I don't necessarily just think leadership's about being necessarily vocal. Or, for instance, I've got a player in my group who, like I said before, really doesn't say anything, but so brave and getting on the ball and trying new things and sort of trying to get us up the pitch sometimes, that might be seen as leadership to someone else. Wow, he's trying to be really brave here, or he's not scared to get on the ball, so I'm going to try and do the same. That's just led someone else. So for me, no, I think it's something that we can develop and enhance throughout their years within the academy.
Cool. I don't know if you've ever tried this task. I've done it once. It was quite interesting results. I had like a leadership group, if you like, 3 lads. This was at older age groups, at under 23s. And I got the squad to pick it. And it's quite interesting what they come back with to what you would necessarily choose. One of the individual I had was probably one of the more challenging in some of his behaviours.
Yeah.
I think what you said there, he was respected by the group because he was quite a good player. The group did respect in the fact that, we'll put up with some of the challenging behaviours because he can play. But I always find it interesting to see what I would perceive as who your leaders would be. And I'd probably agreed with, I think, 3 out of the 4. But the 4th one, that isn't someone that I would have chosen. But the group were like, no. Like, for us, this is the person that we want. So it's a really interesting task doing that one, in my experience.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I always sort of felt that, and I'm not sure. I think the first team do this. I think they have like a leadership team, or sort of a group of players that sort of have a sort of bond between the sort of the players and the staff and stuff. And I think that's a good way to sort of have them sort of common sort of non-negotiables throughout the club, sort of put throughout the group. Because, like you said, if you had a player who was very outgoing and very loud, but couldn't back that up with performance, then he's not going to be a respected player within the group. And then you'll probably find you're going to have issues down the line somewhere. That player's going to go, well, I'm not going to listen to you. Okay. And there's going to be sort of that clash, because if you can perform and go and score a hat trick or keep a clean sheet, then yeah, I'm happy to take a little bit. But ultimately, you want all your players to be respected by each other, and that there's obviously a common goal at the end of it, and that they can all sort of strive and push for that same goal.
And 100%. That's a really good point around the playing side as well. Like, I think it'd be challenging for people to take a lot of information on board from your sixth choice centre half that hasn't played all season. Yeah. So one of the things you've mentioned throughout is quite like how early on in your journey you were really lucky around some of the individuals you were able to work with, and how you picked up bits from them, both of the scholarship program and how he's then gone on to progress, and then at Dagenham, etc. Do you just want to go through maybe a couple of individuals that really influenced your career early on, and maybe what you took from them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd start with, like I said, Mark Phillips at West Ham was obviously a massive influence. One, just giving me an inroad into working and sort of coaching a lot more regularly. I think at the time he was sort of working with younger age groups at West Ham, but again, he was delivering UEFA B sessions to these college boys who are a very good standard, and I sort of picked up a lot of that and was taking notes quite constantly and sort of having to deliver off the back of that. So, like I said, the influence for me was I was going into my level 2, working with 16, 17-year-olds at 19, 20, and I was trying to deliver UEFA B type sessions, and at times there were probably car crashes, but there's probably a lot that I can reflect and take away from them experiences that massively helped me sort of progress quite quickly. I felt at times that I was ready to sort of make that step quite early, and that was probably because of that he was delivering them types of sessions, and very command style, very sort of hard working and committed to every session that we were doing. And I think that sort of helped me drive my values for the future. So yeah, that was a massive influence. And obviously where he's working now at under 18s at West Ham, and obviously been there for years and years, that I can sort of look at that and say, okay, well, I've sort of learned off a very good coach and sort of been able to adapt little bits and bobs from taking bits from others. But yeah, I think that the next sort of influence would have been Dan Molina, who's now at the under 16 England women's, who I worked with at Millwall for 4 or 5 years. He was a massive influence. I worked with him on a regular basis, obviously assisting with the 14s and then working closely with him when he leaded the youth development phase. I think the biggest influence on him or on me was that he brought a very games-based program in, that a lot of what we'd done in the week was very much revolved around the game. Okay, which I really enjoyed, because it got me away from just doing passing practices or just standard possession practices where there was loads of intensity, and that was great. But I think he sort of really started to make me think about, how do I now adapt this possession into our game to fit our style of play? Okay, well, if our principles this week are going to be pressing and regaining, okay, well, how does that look when we go into a 7v7 or an 8v8 at the end? And I think that was probably one of the big things that I took away with working from him, and probably the influences we had on each other, is that we always sort of looked into detail of, how does one work in possession? How does one work out of possession? When do we maybe intervene, and what are our maybe intervention styles? And I think the detail that we put into sessions in terms of even little things like restarts, even if we was working on playing through midfield or pressing and regain, how could we restart our sessions to make it realistic to our game? Okay, well, we're working pressing and regains, but our throw-ins the last 3 or 4 weeks have been really poor. Okay, well, every restart is going to be a throw-in, and we work off that, or everything's going to be a deep free kick and we're going to work from that, or just so there was some sort of emphasis. But yeah, massive influence on sort of that sort of whole that, okay, it's okay to go and start with a small-sided game, and then how do we link that back to a game? Or what about the games within the game? Okay, can we maybe pick little 2v2s and 3v3s within the game to maybe adapt that? So that was a big development for me, and probably one of the biggest influence in terms of how I coach now. just maybe being a bit more game specific at times. And I know we all have our sort of favourite sessions and stuff and how we want to deliver, whether it's unopposed practices or whether it's small possessions or big possessions or unit work. I really enjoyed that game based sort of coaching. So yeah, I would say they're probably two of the biggest influences on where I'm at now.
Cool. So kind of tying into that question and something I ask everyone, which is, who's the best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
Okay, so the player I've worked with would be Darko JB, who we sold to Man City a few years back. 100% the best player I've worked with. At 14s, he was just outstanding, out of this world. Could just drive, just any game that we were struggling with, he could just grab me by the scruff of the neck, and that wouldn't matter who we was playing. Just a real top attitude, hard working, could go and play right back and be your best player, could go and play up front and be your best player. And I think that was massively just because of his attitude and his work rate. And he come in every day with a smile on his face and left with a smile on his face. And he drove the sessions, and that was a brilliant part to be involved with it in terms of coaching. That he could sort of drive your session. If you thought the session was good, but it could be a bit flat at times, he would never let it get to that point. And I think that's no wonder he's where he is now, sort of playing in 23s at Man City and stuff. And I'm sure one day being a professional footballer at the highest level. So yeah, definitely would be Darko in terms of players I've coached. I think in terms of coaching that I work with, I would probably go with Dan Molina, who I work with, just because I felt it was a really good progression for me to sort of step into 14s at Cat 2 and sort of now to start taking my coaching even more seriously and help me along with my A license and stuff. I'd probably say it was probably one of the biggest influences and helped me get to where I've got to. In terms of playing against, I mean, wow, there's been some good sort of Chelsea teams that I've come up against in the last sort of 6 years and stuff. So I'm sure there's players in there that have now gone on to make sort of first team appearances and stuff, but I couldn't nail them down. But yeah, I mean, I think the Chelsea team of probably 4 years ago when we played them at 14s and 15s, they were just outstanding. And like we said, there's probably players in there now that are making first team appearances. There's no surprise in that. In terms of coach playing against, probably quite a tough one to sort of nail that down. I mean, I think there was a Brighton team of probably 3 years ago that sort of probably in the Nationals at Albert Phelan sort of done a bit of a job on us, and they were quite tactically clever and stuff like that, and they sort of understood how we was going to play, and they had a good understanding. They sort of just one of them days that they just done a bit of a job on us, and I think they were quite good in terms of their mannerisms on the side and sort of the intensity they got from their players, but also on the flip side that in possession they were superb, and felt on the day they were certainly the better team, and probably the Brighton management staff at the time were probably the two of the better ones I've come up against.
Perfect. Listen, Ricky, some really interesting content there and loads of considerations for me and for everyone listening to go away with. So really appreciate your time, and hopefully you can catch up again soon.
No, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.